There we go. Excellent. Right, thank you everyone for joining us today for our inaugural Mind Right webinar. We're really lucky to have Teresa Shaw with us today. I hope everyone can hear us okay. Just want to sort of frame what we're going to be doing a little bit today. I'm going to introduce myself first. So I'm Pete Clark. I'm Clinical Director at Mind Right. I am an old ex-case manager by background and have spent the last probably 15 years working in the personal injury sector in various roles. Initially as a case manager, I'm an occupational therapist by background. Initially working as a case manager and then various other roles at other providers, and then started Mind Right about 4 years ago now. Mind Right primarily being a psychological treatment provider, using a range of different clinicians, a range of different treatment modalities, but predominantly within the personal injury market. And Teresa is very much a loved and respected customer of Mind Right with her business. It would be great, Teresa, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll go into some questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm a rehab case manager. I've been involved in the industry for a long time, a bit of a dinosaur. I'm also director of CMS UK, working on events with them. So quite involved in case management, both educationally and practically. I own my own company now, Onyx Rehab, and yeah, I'm nurse by background and still working very much with the customer face, so very much dealing with clients on a daily basis. I started working with Mind Right when they first started, so I was lucky to be involved in their beginning and just starting off, so I was able to provide sort of an influence to that as well, which was really good. Okay, that's me.
Thank you very much. So I know we've got a range of different people who are joining us today. We've got some clinicians, some treating clinicians, who I'm sure would love to know a little bit more about how things work in the personal injury market and how we can work with case managers. I think we've also got some case managers who have joined us and are joining us, who I'm sure would be keen to understand some of our insights around how we can make the interactions between the client's rehab journey and their treatment journey more aligned and work a little bit better. So for a little bit more context, we're just the other side of Mental Health Awareness Week now. What we really wanted to do was offer this opportunity for some CPD and to shine a light on some of these issues for some people. We really do want this to be an interactive session. I know the way the webinar setup works, it's quite difficult to interact verbally and what have you, but we've got the Q&A function on here in the chat, so please do drop questions into that as we go. I'll have a look at it periodically, and if there's anything in either the chat or the Q&A that we can touch on, we will. And we really welcome some of that. We've timed the session so that there's some time towards the end for us to really dedicate to some Q&A if we can. Otherwise, we'll give you some time back if there are no questions at the end. So really what we're going to do is take a really sort of conversational approach. Teresa and I are going to have a conversation. I've got some questions prepared for her. And I'll probably have some opinions of my own, as Teresa and I were just discussing as we go through. We're not going to go through any slides or anything like that. More than happy to put some together based on any questions that we get as we go. But yeah, really looking forward to some of those questions. So, Teresa, can you share with us a time when you feel like good quality psychological input really changed the rehab trajectory for a client that you've worked with?
Yeah, it can be very up and down, because it's a traumatic event, and it can be either trauma of the actual incident or trauma, post-trauma, the events in the hospital, when they get home, life-changing events, etc. And these can be quite minor injuries as well. They don't have to be major injuries. Just having a fracture straightened without any anaesthetic can be quite traumatic for some people if they've never had that experience. So we're picking them up, and the way we try, when you get a case that you get a really good psychologist in who can really connect with the client, and personality-wise works. Yeah, it's perfect. They'll grow. I've got a client at the moment I'm thinking of who's a very difficult client, was initially very difficult to get engaged with anyone. Strong levels of turning into everything was really painful. He had a major motorcycle accident, so it was pretty grim injuries, diaphragmatic hernias, etc. So he was very frightened as well. But the psychologist has managed to connect with him and really working to make things better for him. And he's actually now pain levels are reducing, he's doing more, and he's engaging in his rehab better because he couldn't do physio because he was in too much pain. But now the psychology stuff is working, is actually now engaging physically. So the outcome is getting better every day. So that I would say is a good outcome, really, of
It really
psychological
is.
therapy. Yeah.
Absolutely, it really is. I mean, my view is that really, these sort of events that are traumatic do have that massive impact on function, obviously, and any impact on function can have such a dramatic impact on someone's mood, their anxiety levels, and it's when we're seeing people who are having any it's the OT in me coming out. I can't help but be obsessed with function. It's when people are unable to do the things that they need to do every day. It has such a dramatic impact on their mood. Therefore, that good interaction, that sort of early interaction, while symptoms are still not at their heightened point, really, can have such a dramatic impact on function. And if we can improve function, we can enter that positive cycle of improved function, leading to improvement in symptoms, leading to improved function, and that's by far and away the cycle that we want to be engaged in, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
definitely you need the psychotherapy on board to get the function. You can't do them in isolation. I think if you try and do physiotherapy without having the psychological support, the physios will start ringing you and saying, "Can we get some help?" Because he can't do, or the fearful, or the frightened to move, and that's all the psychological support they need to be able to do the physiotherapy. So it needs to be in conjunction to get the functional stuff right. And I think
yeah,
sometimes we don't sell that enough to insurers and solicitors when we're
mm,
putting psychotherapy in, and it got a bad name because everybody needed psychotherapy. Well, unfortunately, after traumatic events, it's very common to be traumatized.
yeah,
But you need it to do the physical stuff. So ignoring it, not putting it in place, and sort of trying to, yeah, it won't work. So we need to really sell to the insurers that, and we should put it in our reports as well, that we need the psychological stuff to help them carry out the physical treatment. And I think
absolutely.
sometimes we play that down a little as case managers, and that's something useful to put in your reports to sell why you need X number of sessions of therapy.
And I think, again, putting my old ex case manager hat on, if you can link it back to function, it becomes so much easier to sell. If we manage these symptoms, we're going to
Mm,
enable this person to do X, Y, and Z. We're just going to push them further along with their rehab goals, which is going to get them closer to being where you need them to be, Mr. Insurer or Mr. Solicitor, whoever it is
yeah,
we're negotiating with
yeah.
on that front. That's
Hmm.
really useful. Thank you. So from a case manager's perspective, and you already sort of touched on this a little bit in what you've just said, but from a case manager's perspective, what are the barriers to getting psychological treatment fast tracked, and how can we overcome them? I think you have touched on that quite a bit just now, but just what do you
Yeah,
think the barriers are?
you've got initially getting the authority to put it in place. So the funding, that you've got to make sure you've got a good case for why you're doing it. The other one is getting the right therapist for the right client. Now that's always tricky, and sometimes we've got to accept that it might take two or three different therapists just because of personalities, and it's very hard to judge personalities till they work together. And I think if they don't click, then it doesn't work. And we've got to let our clients know that it might not work. The first one might not be right. We might have to change. So they don't carry on and on and on, flogging a dead horse, and they actually come back to you and say, I don't get on with this person. Then you can deal with it quickly and change, get a new therapist on board. And I've done that a few times with Mindright. It's just personalities of my clients
Absolutely.
didn't match the personality of the therapist. They've worked perfectly great on other clients. So it's not their technique, it's just personality. And that's a very big part of psychotherapy. But yeah, that can be a barrier. The other one, the trickier one, is when clinicians can be a bit this sounds terrible, really. Psychologists can be a little, their expectations of a client can be too high, in that they expect a nice middle class person to sit and have a chat with them, when we know
Yeah, I
all
know what
our
you mean.
clients come from
All
various
walks of life. Yeah.
backgrounds with various pre-existing issues of maybe alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and we need to try and be less judgmental. And that can be a big barrier if they are judgy, because it puts the client off, or they're saying they're frightened because they can't look after the client in their office. And you've had carers in the house, young girls going in 4 times a day for 6 months, and there's no issue. And you've visited them several times. So, you're aware of the issues of risk. But yeah, that can be a big barrier, but that's rare. I think persuading the client can sometimes be the problem. They can be reluctant to go into therapy. They can not see the benefits of doing it. So it can be the client side as well who can put the barrier up to say, no, I don't want therapy. I don't want it. I'm fine, when whatever you give them doesn't work, because they need to sort their head out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, you've touched on some really, really interesting things there, and I think a lot of what you've touched on sort of comes back to really the importance of getting the right clinician at the right time, doing the right job. So, we all know that the psychological treatment can be challenging, particularly modalities like CBT. Clients can find that really, really challenging, particularly the first few sessions when they're being challenged really for possibly the first time ever on the way that they think about certain things, the way they engage with their own symptoms, and the way they engage with their own life. And I think that a real positive step towards overcoming that initial hurdle of therapy being hard is to have a really decent therapeutic relationship that can be built on bonds of similarity, that can be built on the fact that we've made sure we have a clinician who speaks the same language as the client, where possible having a clinician who comes from a similar ethnic or cultural background, where the client is going to have an early engagement with them. That's not to say that it can't work the other way. It absolutely can, but finding some commonality between, again, it's the OT in me coming back to therapeutic use of self, and as a clinician being able to use your own strengths, your own who you are and what you're about to engage better with your client as a really, really big impact. But you're right, recognizing early when there is a mismatch, when it's not quite going to work. And I think all of this comes down to communication again. I'm referring to myself as a case manager here. If we as case managers, I haven't case managed for a long time, but if case managers can have a really early conversation with the treatment provider, with the clinician, about their experience of working with this client and what they've learned, that can have a really positive impact on rehab outcomes as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the other thing is we've got to take our clients when we get them, and it can be sometimes it's getting better, but sometimes it is a couple of years after the incident. So it's historical then. So, but we have to deal with what we've got. We can't turn the clock back.
Well, we certainly do. And yeah, that sort of timeline can be difficult, because we all know that early intervention gets the better outcomes. But I think if you're clear about what you're trying to achieve, then later intervention can still be really successful.
Yeah.
So what role do you think that psychological clinicians, that are psychotherapists and psychologists, should play in the broader rehab journey in the context of, pushing to achieve an overall rehab goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can be really good. I mean, I get them now. I've used quite a few psychologists joining in on a MDT meeting, especially when there's chronic pain involved. I
Yeah,
think we need those meetings with the physio, the psychologists, whoever's dealing with the pain, um, and have those meetings so everybody knows the language they're using to the client, so it's the same language, because that can be confusing and the client can get a bit lost in that. So it is important to have those meetings, to share the language, share the goals, where you go in with the client, what you're trying to achieve. um, I also think that works really well. And I also think if the psychologist sticks with the remit of what they're doing, rather than
mhm,
developing too much of a dependence, because clients can slip into being dependent upon this therapist. So it's
absolutely.
important they sort of take a step back and don't, because if they become dependent, that can hamper the progress of the rehab. Um, so yeah, I think they generally, it helps with, like I said before, getting the physical stuff moving, getting them back into work. Yeah, and just general function. If we've got the psychotherapist working with us on that, then yeah, all the better. So it is communication. That's the
Yeah.
biggest bit, both ways as well.
Yeah, and I think that sort of collaboration between the different clinicians
Mm,
as part of this sort of remote MDT, I think sort of taking that MDT approach can get a little bit easier. Conversely, it
mm,
gets a little bit easier the more complex the case is.
yeah.
The more complex the case is, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to get all those clinicians on the same call, in the same room, even in some cases, and communicating. But I
Hmm.
think, even if you're looking at some of the less complex cases, if you're looking at, a multi-track level case, I think
Mm,
at least keeping different clinicians who from different disciplines and working towards their own different treatment goals, keeping them appraised of what's going on in other areas of rehab can have a
yeah.
really, really positive impact on the overall rehab journey. If the psychological clinician knows what the physiotherapist is trying to achieve,
Yes.
and how they're going about trying to achieve that, and how the intricacies of what they are doing with the client may impact on the client's mood and levels of anxiety, that can really help that clinician to do what they're doing, and vice versa. I mean, when the psychological clinician is noticing that certain behaviours, certain actions, certain uh, sort of environments and interactions with the client are causing certain symptoms or certain groups of symptoms to worsen or improve, sharing that knowledge with the case manager so that they can share that knowledge with the physio, who can also have an impact on that. And I'm using the two of psychologist and physio there, but
Mm,
it goes
the
for
most
it goes
common.
for all of the clinicians that you've got involved, really, doesn't it?
Hmm.
If the team, albeit a remote team who don't communicate very often, if they're aware of what each other are trying to achieve, it can have a really positive impact on the overall journey, I think.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't share enough of the medical stuff with the psychologist. So the client will tell him I need surgery and make it bigger than it is. Whereas if we shared the information that this is quite a minor procedure, yeah, it's going to be big in their life, but it's fairly minor. Can you help with it? They can sort of rationalize it with the client for us, rather than getting a report back saying, "Oh well, the having major surgery and this is going to impact. We need another 10 sessions because it's going to disturb them." If we'd communicated what was going on, that would prevent that, and that it's a very much a joint process with the psychotherapist. Then they're
Yeah,
aware, because they don't come from a medical background, so might not be um, sure what it is they're having done medically. So, it is our
yeah,
job to share that information to make it work better. And they can help them get through that fear of going into hospital again. If we communicate with them, that can be
yeah.
useful, rather than um, making it, catastrophizing it all. So it makes it even worse than it is.
I think that's a really important point. I think sort of having that context of knowing what's going on and what that really means for the client in terms of other treatment that they're engaged in. I think that can make a really, really big difference to the outcome of the therapy that their client's engaged in. And you're absolutely right in that, that context includes the foibles of the client and how they're interpreting the experience that they're having, which is absolutely valid regardless of it being slightly exaggerated sometimes. It's still really important to have that context about how the client feels about it all.
Yeah. But if the therapist is unaware what it is, they can only support them in what they're saying rather than challenge that and sort of make it real, if you like, or help them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right, we've reached the middle of my questions, so I've slotted into the middle the very salesy, let's talk about Mindright a little bit question, and then we'll get back on with the real ones. You've worked with a number of treatment providers. We were talking about some of them just before we started the webinar off now. What's different about Mindright? How do we approach things differently?
I actually like Mindright. Mindright actually get what we're doing. In that we're case managers and we're case managing a case. Some providers do that delivery and it can be more dependent, get the clients more dependent upon them. Whereas I think what Mindright do, they know it's a fairly short intervention. It's about getting them moving on in the journey of the rehab journey rather than providing therapy for life. So that because you get what we're doing as case managers, it helps us. The reports are good in that you give us the information we need, because often that's tricky with providers getting the right information. We don't want overload dump, but we need good information of what you're doing, what's happening, how the progress, what's the measures, and we get that from you in the reports, which is, I think, one of the gifts, because a psychology report, we send it off to the insurers and solicitors. It could kill us in that what on earth really is it saying? Because it isn't saying anything, or it's saying we want them to have another 50 sessions. And but you get it and you challenge your therapists as well. And when you get reports back, you already have challenged and sorted it before it comes to us, which cuts our time down a lot, and we then get something useful to share and understand what's happened with the client and what treatment's been provided. That's a biggie, and you can't underestimate reports in this world, really.
You really can't.
Finding therapists in very unusual places to do unusual things. You're really good at that, because we do challenge you.
You do, you absolutely do. It's absolutely music to my ears hearing you say these particular things. And just for everyone listening, we didn't plan exactly what Teresa was going to say before this happened.
No,
but
we've not met.
We've not, have we?
No.
But the points you've just raised are the reasons that Mindright exists. So the things that you've touched on there are the things that frustrated me as a case manager, and the things that I thought could be done better in this space. Getting language into the reports that doesn't upset either a solicitor or an insurer is a fine line to tread. And I also think that it's unfair for the clinicians on this call who may or may not be a part of Mindright's network just yet. I think it's unfair to expect clinicians who are delivering treatment to know all of this stuff and to just be able to enter the personal injury market and just do it the way case managers need them to do it straight away. That's why the management structure at Mindright is made up of predominantly old ex-case managers who can do that bit on behalf of our clinicians, who can make sure that the way they're engaging with therapy with these particular clients is mindful of that sort of case management personal injury journey that's going on. And right, that's enough salesy speak. I think I've said please use Mindright in a very, very roundabout way there. But let's get back to some more interesting questions. how do you think that sort of a rapid clinical triage of a client and sort of that rapid allocation to the right clinician can affect long-term outcomes?
Well, it certainly can. I mean, when we go out to see our clients, we never know what we're going to face when we knock on the door. Um, and we can find clients in a terrible state and suicidal at high risk. And just getting the right intervention. We all know, yeah, there is crisis teams out there for the NHS, which we do engage in, but if they don't tick a box, they don't get the treatment. Um, so seeking private help, we need to get it done triaged quick. And that's one thing I've Mandrake quite good at, because they'll put a high level clinician to triage them for us as well. So they'll go with a mental health head on to. So if I identify some issues, I refer them urgent. A clinician will go in, will ring them up and do another triage on them specific for their mental health needs, and provide treatment goals, signposting, and a clinician as soon as.
Mm.
So yeah, it does. So when there's crisis point, yeah, we need it fast. You know, we need that support, because there's nothing worse than walking away from a client knowing that they're in danger. Um, and you don't know you're doing that till you get knocking on the door, like I said. And then there's other times when you go in and yeah, everything's fine, but there's they are traumatized, and you're not going to get them into the physio door, you're not going to get them out the house, you're not going to get them anywhere until we address the psychological needs. So yeah, getting them through and that in place quickly, getting the assessment done, getting it lined up ready to do the treatment can really be beneficial, because then you can start putting in the physical stuff, because they've got a bit more confidence to set out the door. So it does really help the outcomes of the program. I mean, every client's unique. It's very difficult because every situation, every client you go to see, I've not seen two alike in the 20 years I've been practicing. So, and I'll
No,
be
I don't
interested
think
if
I have.
anybody else finds it. But yeah, they are so unique. But yeah, getting them through and triage quickly, getting the right therapist in there quickly can only help everything else in the program, and it can
I
move it
mean,
forward, and then we can cut the time we've got the case open, which is really what we want to do. We want to get
absolutely.
in there, get them right, get them back to the lifestyle, and leave them to it. That's what our job is, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. And one of the things I find interesting is, um, whilst I've never met a good case manager who is naive to what's going on psychologically with their client. I mean,
Mm,
every case manager on this call is well aware of what's going on with their clients psychologically and can spot when something's not quite right.
mm,
That being said, I think I was a bit of an anomaly as a case manager in that my predominant clinical background is a mental health one. Um, the vast majority of case managers that I know come from a physical health
yeah.
background,
Hmm.
and we cannot be all things to all people, and
No.
we cannot know everything. So knowing where you can go to get a really sound view of what's going on psychologically with a client
Hmm.
is I think important for a case manager to be able to say that I recognise there's an issue here. I don't necessarily know what type of clinician needs to be involved here,
Mm,
what treatment modality needs to be used, what the duration of that treatment might be, and rather than introduce guesswork to any of that, it's far better to use an expert in
yeah,
that area to do that
definitely.
triage, to do that initial assessment, and to give a really clear early view of what is actually required and how do we go about getting that for the client as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
So
and what the risks are as well. Are we
absolutely,
putting the client in risk? Do we need to do anything else? That's really good to have that to
yeah.
support our thinking, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. So let's talk about something a little bit more negative now. So in your experience, how and where can the relationship between case management and psychological therapy or therapist, how have you experienced, or how can that break down? How can it go wrong? and what do we do about that?
It's it's a difficult one, but yeah, I have had ones where they have gone badly wrong. Um, when the therapist tries to do more than psychotherapy. So they'll be telling the client to go and search help here, go and get this, rather than coming back and saying, look, we need to work together and get them to have this address, that address. Maybe it's outdoor activities, maybe it's going to a physio, maybe it's going to a different health professional. That makes things very difficult because they put ideas in the client's mind and they go running in one direction when you've got the full medical picture and you're pushing them in another direction. So that can be really difficult and it can break the relationship down. Also, not feeding back everything can be really tricky because the client will tell us something, we're totally unaware of what you're talking about what's happened here. And that's tricky. Yeah, it's that demands of what's happening when and what they're doing with the client, and not, it's communication basically, isn't it? Both
Yeah, I was going to
ways.
say exactly
They're
that.
not
Yeah,
communicating with us, and sorry, the postman's just arrived.
no problem.
It's
No problem.
yeah, so it can be very difficult if the communication from the therapist isn't great with us, or our communication with them isn't great, then the relationship will fall apart. In years ago, it used to be very difficult when therapists just didn't seem to have the um, know-how or qualification to look after a client, and they were looking after clients when they weren't properly qualified to do the job, which made it very tricky, because some of the things they were doing weren't quite um, as we would expect, or as NICE recommends, or
Yeah,
yeah, so things like that can make the relationship very tricky, because we'll get a knockback when we're wanting more therapy. We won't get funding for it. We know before we've asked we're not going to get it, which then the therapists are like stopped because they've got to stop their
yeah.
treatment. But yeah, we're
And I think
piggies in the
that's
middle
that. You know,
sometimes.
well, an element of that is sort of naivety on the part of clinicians sometimes to the personal injury journey and what that looks
Mm,
like, and the sort of milestones that have to be achieved in order to be able to continue to engage in treatment. You know, the foibles of how an insurer works, how a solicitor works, what information they need. And I think if we can support our clinicians to not necessarily fully understand that, because I think that's
mm.
quite a big ask to get them to fully understand that, but support them
We
in being
used to
able to
get
do
that
it.
statement from therapists. They'll be better having the treatment once the claim's settled. And it used to
Yeah,
be a broad statement on the bottom of every report. And you used to think, no, I need to get them right before we can settle. But yeah, it was a bit annoying that when, but that
yeah.
seems to be less now. But yeah, that one statement, well, virtually it's suggesting that the client's exaggerating it while the claim's on, so it's not good for the client. So the solicitors get really unhappy, and it's sort of say, well, we don't need it now. Just
Yeah,
carry on as you are without us, and we'll pick it up after.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's
We
not going to
both we both
happen.
talked we both talked quite a little bit about communication and the importance of good quality communication. Just to elaborate on that a little bit, what do you think that good communication looks like between a therapist and the case manager? How often do you want to be communicated with by the therapist? What content do you want to see? How do we get it right?
It's nice to have part way through. Say if you've got, I don't know, let's say 12 sessions. You've got your initial. I'd like a halfway report to tell me halfway through that we're okay, everything's on track, so I can measure and see if progress has been made. Is the client engaged and is that relationship fine? Which I've already asked the client about their side of it, but it's nice to have the psychotherapist view. Other than, and then one at the end, other than that, if there's any changes or needs or anything that occurs out of the ordinary progress, I would like a quick email to tell me that things aren't quite as they should be, or the client's telling me about this. Can you look into it? Just to make us aware of what's happening. Because sometimes the client won't tell everybody everything, and they may only just tell the therapist because they've got that close relationship. Then drop an email, and I'm happy to have any comment. Like they've told me they've just taken a load of diazepam, or they're telling me that their arm is really severely painful now, or they really hate the doctor they're seeing, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. To a quick email, then we can dig further and look into it, and resolve it before it becomes a big issue. At the end of the treatment, there's still an issue. We can try
Yeah,
and
that's
resolve
the
it
key,
on the
isn't it?
way. Yeah.
The stuff that could be useful to resolve a problem or a potential problem in any area of the rehab is an important thing to
Yeah.
know. And for the clinicians who are on the call who are part of Mind Rights Network, if you've got cases with us, then that doesn't need to be a big complex interaction.
A
A
quick
really
email.
simple email into our admin team at Mind Right, and we'll take it from there. We'll talk to the customer and we'll make sure they get the information that they need. It is really, really very, very useful.
Yeah, because that keeps the relationship between all parties going as well when you think about a good outcome, good relationship, because we're all working together then.
Yeah.
And that builds that relationship between us and the clinician. And so I do think it's quite important, even if it appears trivia, a quick email takes a second. It doesn't matter, does it? It just keeps
No.
us all communicating and all aware of what's happening. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about goals, about rehab goals and treatment goals. And
Hmm.
one of the things that was really important to me when we launched MindRight is that we had the ability to have visibility of what an overall rehab goal that a case manager is looking to achieve, and that we could align our treatment goals to help pull in the same direction. That
Hmm.
that doesn't always happen, and there are areas of practice out there and
No.
providers out there where those goals can be misaligned. What can be the
Mm.
impact for you as a case manager to your client's rehab journey if there is a misalignment between those goals?
The biggie, I can think of one case where the biggie where the client was employed, got a fabulous employer who was going to do everything to help this employee go back to work. We visited. They were really, they could do how many hours they wanted.
Mm,
There was going to be supported. They made sure they could access the area properly. Transport was going to be provided for. They were bending over backwards to get this person back. Um, the, so our goal was to return to his previous employment on a phased return. The therapist decided that no, he's not fit to return to work, it's not going to work, drew a line under it and had no consideration of whether the employer was helping and supporting. And I think with support from the therapist, if they'd come back to me and said, not sure this is right, rather than just draw a line with the client and never mention it again,
yeah.
um, I think they could have worked with the client to help them. In the end, the job he didn't go back to work, lost his
Oh,
job,
that's such a
and
shame.
it was a very well paid job for what he did. And it's so sad because it was a supportive environment he was going to go back to, and that happened because I think if the therapist had worked with the goal that was to return to work, it could have been a very different outcome. Yeah, he could have questioned that, we're not ready yet. What is it like at work? Tell me what that visit was like.
Yeah.
And we could have had that discussion, and knowing it was so supportive, and perhaps he could have encouraged them to start with a few hours a week just to dip the toe in to see how it was. And I think they would have been fine. It's so sad, but yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we're seeing a theme develop here through all of these questions that we're going through.
Communication.
Communication is something that I always bang on about, in
Yeah.
every, not even just the meetings that I have where we're talking about how we should approach in working with our clients, but when I'm talking about my team and how I'm managing my team and how we interact with our customers and how we interact with the clients, and not just from a therapeutic perspective, but all of our interactions can be improved by good quality communication. And I think that,
And maybe it's on my part as well. Maybe I should have already told him that the employer was supportive and the results, or shared the return to work visit meeting notes with them. Maybe that was a lack of my insight as well, and a learning curve for me, that I should have given more information in the first instance, really.
well, that may be the case,
Yeah.
but I think also you've probably fell foul of the fact that good quality communication, as we've advanced technologically as a species, good quality communication has actually got a bit harder. I think so. For me, the best quality communication we can possibly have, and I still encourage my team to do this, and I would encourage everyone on this call to do this. The best quality communication we could have with the other stakeholders that we need to interact with is a conversation, a simple conversation
Yeah.
about, this is what's going on. This is what we think about what's going on. This is where we would like to move things to. How does that impact on the journey that you're on, be it the therapeutic journey, the administrative journey, whatever journey that is? Communicating about what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it can have such a positive impact on
Yeah.
both the relationship, the professional relationship you have with your customers and with the people who you're working with, the sort of collaborative relationship that you've got with your partners and the people putting the same journey that you're trying to pull towards, but also the therapeutic relationship. Good quality communication as a baseline and a foundation for that therapeutic relationship is so very, very important, that I think it will feature in all of my answers to all of the webinars that I engage in ad nauseum for the rest of my existence. Good quality communication improves everything.
Yeah, and on both sides, like I say. I think we're always fearful of information overload when we're sending a referral in. So you try and keep it to the main bits, but you want them to know what the physical stuff is. You want to help them understand that. You want to help them understand everything else of being involved in the incident, everything else. So it's a challenge to know what to include and what not to. So maybe we should, perhaps as case managers, focus on our outcome better and give the information to support that outcome. I don't know. It's a thought.
I think it's something that can exist on both sides of that fence, on the treatment rehab fence. I think stronger, better communication on both sides of any engagement helps. And I will get off of that particular soapbox right now until the next question, when I'm sure communication will come up again. I'm actually going to skip one because I'm very mindful of time, and I want to leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A. I can see there is something in there. I will have a look in just a second. So there's often a perception that therapy can take too long. And that's something that I've encountered with some of the case managers I've worked with, particularly some of the other stakeholders, the sort of solicitors and insurers out there, that sort of therapy is taking too long or can take too long. How do we counter that belief? Because we still need to deliver good outcomes, which essentially means that the journey takes as long as it's going to take, if you ask me. But how do we counter those beliefs and support people to come on that journey with us?
Yeah, I think sometimes towards the end of therapy, I think we need to outline a bit more clearly why the spreading out the sessions, because that's the biggest one, I think, is that initially they're going weekly and they're getting the treatment done, then they phase it out. And I get that. They need to leave them to do work for a month and see how pick up. But I think if they actually set out that plan in writing in the first instance, that we want 12 sessions, this will be managed with I don't know, 8 done weekly and the last 4 will be done over a 4-month period, then we know the length.
Yeah.
And I get the need to do that, because if someone's seen someone weekly, then you just say bye, that's going to be psychologically, that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get that, but if they set that out, how they intended to deliver them, are they delivering them on? Because in a physio report, you get that. We will do
Yes.
10 weeks weekly, 10 weeks fortnightly, then we'll see them after 6 months, check in on them, that sort of thing. You would get that, so you know the period of time you're looking at.
Mhm.
I find with therapists, they just do it because that's what they do, but they don't always tell us that's what's happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's communication again. Sorry.
Yes. No. I knew it would come back to it. It was bound to. It was inevitable. But I agree. It's communicating. It's communicating what you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to achieve it, and the time frame to which that can be expected to play out.
Mm,
Um, is really important. And again, that does go both ways. Again, we do need the case manager to communicate what they're expecting to see progress. Case managers are privy to all sorts of information. For example, the case manager might learn through the process that they're engaged in, that they're expecting their client to receive a settlement offer at some point in the future.
mm,
If the clinician can be made privy to that information, look, we're expecting a settlement offer, or the client is expecting a settlement offer, that will likely mean that treatment is curtailed. So start thinking about how you're going to finish this engagement sooner than you had planned to. That communication, I think, could have a really big difference for the clinician's relationship with the client, because knowing that information will enable them to not feel that disappointment that you spoke of earlier when they're
mm.
suddenly told, that's it, we're closing down the case. And
Yeah.
understanding that the client being offered a settlement will mean that funding goes away for treatment unless the client
Mm,
unless the client chooses to continue to pay for it themselves, which, let's face it, most clients don't.
mm-hmm.
Sort of knowing that information and knowing that there's a journey going on, and that ultimately it's going to be the client's choice as to whether or not treatment ends, because if they take the settlement offer, they know that funding for treatment goes away. Would probably improve the relationship between therapist and case manager.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if it's set out and it's a set program, I think some insurers would continue funding till it's complete, and that'll be part of the settlement agreement. So if we as case managers could have that information that they're going to do these 2 sessions over a period of time, then some insurers would agree to continue that funding and allow us to carry it on till it's finished, and that'll be part of their settlement.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so if we have that up front, that plan of what's in their idea, sometimes it must be hard, but I'd say at the part way through report, they must have some idea how it's going and where they're going with it, and maybe it's at that point they could share, are they going to spread the appointments out at that stage, or yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I agree completely. Look, I want to leave us a couple of minutes at least at
yeah.
the end to do Q&A if there are any. I do want to ask you one more question before we do that, though, if
Right.
that's okay. So, if there was one thing that you could change about the way psychological treatment services are commissioned in the personal injury world, what would you change?
I think it's getting communication better between case manager and the person delivering the therapy.
Mhm.
Getting that, if that could be improved, that would be better. That would make a massive difference. Sometimes you can feel you're not quite getting the information to the therapist.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's and understanding how your communication is communicated to the therapist will be helpful as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's difficult, isn't it? I mean,
it's always difficult.
many providers out there are reluctant to allow good interaction between case manager
Mm,
and therapist. there are, inherent risks that they perceive that I don't think are actually that serious or that big an issue. I mean, if a case manager or a case management firm are having a good experience with the provider that they're using, they're not gonna try to damage that relationship by engaging directly with the clinician in any sort of nefarious way. So in Mind Right, we think it's
But
important that
I
you
think
can
we've got to
communicate with the clinician if
remember,
you need to.
yeah, you remember that going through a provider, what we're purchasing is the governance of those individuals. Now, if we
Absolutely.
go direct, we have to take on that responsibility and check the supervision, check their insurance, check everything else, where we're trusting. Well, that's your responsibility as a provider to do all that. We don't have to even think about it. And I think
Absolutely.
that's
And you're doing a better
what
job
we've
of
got to
selling Mind Right than
remember.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, uh, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, a really important thing there is two things: duty of care and risk. So working with
Mhm.
Mind Right, we are responsible for that
Yeah.
client's psychological safety, as far as
Mhm.
we're concerned. And that's something that when I case managed always really sort of confused and frustrated me when I get it's always a Friday afternoon, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, call from a clinician saying, "I think this client might be suicidal. Good luck with that, case
Yeah.
manager." Um,
Yeah.
and then sort of leave you in the thick of it to try and fix that.
Mm.
We don't do that. That duty of care sits with us. We obviously
Mm.
would keep our case management colleagues appraised of what's going on, but we're best
Mm.
placed to handle that risk, and we do.
Mhm.
Um, Right, thank you for that. That was the end of my questions. So
Good.
we'll throw it over to the audience. Sorry, put you on the spot a bit there. Throw it over to the audience if there are any questions you've got there. We've got a comment here from Maria saying, I think that therapists need to be more relaxed and to know more about return to work. I absolutely agree. All companies have an easy way back to work. They should, and I think most of them actually do. I think we have a lot of
Mhm.
actually very good employers out there nowadays.
Mhm.
Um, and Maria advises them to talk to occupational health and see them while they do the return to work, and it's quite successful. I absolutely agree.
Mhm.
So sort of
Yeah.
that close interaction between the different players, between
Mhm.
sort of occupational health or HR, line management, even just sort of engagement between sort of clinician, case manager, and those stakeholders absolutely lead to positive return to work
Mhm.
outcomes, which ultimately is what we're looking for in this market. Usually, we're off. Usually, our clients are working age adults or people who are engaged in things like school or college or what have you, and that sort of engagement can have a really, really positive impact. Any more questions from anyone? We've sort of not got anything else in the Q&A. Oh, there we go. Diana, is it necessary to see all clients face to face, or can they be seen virtually? So we'll talk about it both from a treatment perspective and a case management perspective, because I'm not quite sure where we're aiming that. So from a treatment perspective, no, I think we absolutely don't need to see all clients face to face. I think there are certain clinical reasons why that might sometimes be the most appropriate way to go. Certain sort of cultural reasons why that sometimes might be the most appropriate way to go. Certain environmental reasons why that might be the most appropriate way to go. But look, we all know, we're all well versed in the fact that most treatment modalities, I'm thinking particularly of CBT, are at least as effective if delivered virtually
Mm.
as if delivered in person. The barrier that I think case managers have to overcome when they're talking about weighing up the pros and cons of in-person treatment versus remotely delivered treatment boils down sometimes to a matter of recoverability, particularly on single instruction cases. We still live in a world where some customers out there, some solicitors in particular, have a strong view one way or the other about the efficacy of treatment being delivered in person or remotely, and that's an ongoing education piece that we need to engage in. That treatment being just delivered in person isn't necessarily the better
Mm.
of the treatment delivery options. But it's important, we like to be able to say that the majority of clinicians on our team at Mind Right do have at least some in-person delivery capability. But no, it's absolutely a mix. Do you agree with what I've just said, Teresa? Before we move on to the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
one.
I do, and I actually think it can be really, as long as the person's got good IT connections, and are happy to do remote. I found it even in elderly clients have done really well because they've not had to trail out for yet another appointment. They've been able to do the therapy in the comfort of their own home and have done really well. So I think there's a benefit for both, but it's what's right for the individual, really.
Yeah,
And so it's for the case manager to make that call, really. I always ask my clients, are they happy to do it virtual, tell them the benefits and the disadvantages, and they can make their own decision. Yeah, and sometimes
absolutely.
you've got you do virtual and then it changes to face, and the clinician tends to work with them on that. So that's, it doesn't always mean it's continuously virtual, or indeed face to face when they can't get to clinic, do it virtually. Works
Absolutely.
both ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. Deborah, thank you for your question. So, as a case manager, my connection is with MindRight, and I've not been in contact details for the clinician. Is there an option to communicate directly with the clinician? Absolutely, there is. If you just send a request into the team at MindRight, whoever it is that's looking after your case, I can't see which company you're working for, so I don't know which of our pods it is that we're looking after your case. But yeah, if you send a request into them, asking to speak with the clinician, will absolutely facilitate that.
There's a question there about delay in getting funding
Yeah, that's an
from.
interesting one, isn't it? It is tricky. It
Yeah,
is
I
very
mean,
tricky.
the problem is that there is a legal claim going on, and although we as case managers get frustrated as well, um, it might be something to do with blame and who's, liability issues, or we're not always privy to what's going on, but we should be mindful with these cases that there is a legal claim going on, that we're not all privy to all the interaction, and that's why there might be a delay. We do we always keep on top, and I'm sure every case manager in the country does, that we chase constantly for funding, always chasing. Um, we might not get an answer, we might get an answer, and we will try and share. But yeah, it's not because
Yeah,
we've not tried to
there's
get
always
it.
context. Yeah, there is always
Yeah.
context. I mean, if we take, if we use Admiral as an example, as one of the bigger insurers and one that I know the numbers
Yeah.
for, so we'll use them for example. I know that a claims handler at Admiral probably looks after about 300
Yeah.
individual cases at any given
Yeah.
time. They have huge communication backlogs, as well as needing to actually do a bit of decision making in there. They have huge communication backlogs. So you send them a communication asking for approval for 6 additional sessions. They might not even get to look at that request for 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then they've got to go through a decision making process. They've got to review the case. They've got to look at the reserve that's set and
Yeah.
how much
Yeah.
impact the approval of additional sessions will have on that reserve. They've got to look if there's any sort of contention at the moment between them and the claimant side in terms of liability, etc., as you've just mentioned. So there are a huge number of variables that they need to consider before being able to give that approval, as well as being overworked and underpaid and taking a long time. And I think
But
as long as
on top of that, they could have a defendant's lister that you send it to first, and they've got to go through that process before they even send it to the insurer for their decision. So that can add to it as well. A
absolutely,
delay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
More of an administrative question here. So, what's the formal processing time for invoices once received by MindRight? So, I'm assuming that's invoices that our treating clinicians deliver to us for their payment. So, our contracts with our treating clinicians state that invoices will be paid on the last working day of the month following their submission. So, an invoice submitted today should be paid by the last working day of June. If that's not been anyone's experience, we'd like to hear about that. Maria, in the last EMDR conference, we were told that it may become compulsory to do face-to-face. I find this move ridiculous because virtual is quite successful. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I mean, the evidence base for remotely delivered EMDR is growing rapidly. It's not as strong as the evidence base for remotely delivered CBT for obvious reasons, but there are a huge number of sort of tools that can be used now, as you'll know better than I, in terms of being able to achieve the thing that you need to achieve when you're with your clients. And the evidence base is growing. There's strong evidence to suggest that remotely delivered EMDR is just as effective.
And I think we've got to remember in the UK, there is some remote areas, Scotland, Wales, even parts of the UK, where there just aren't any therapists. So we're expecting an injured client to travel 40 miles to get to a therapist there and back.
Yeah, it's
You've got
unrealistic.
to eat some of the islands of Scotland. They're going to have to get a boat ferry as well. So, we have to think about we've got to keep it remote for those individuals who cannot access a therapist. I think I'd appreciate if therapists could fight for that. I'd
Yeah,
support it.
as I absolutely agree. So look, we've reached time. We've talked through till 11 o'clock, Teresa. So before we wrap up, are there any final questions from anyone? I think we've addressed everything that was there. Even when they're close, they miss because of meeting. Yeah, absolutely. And some thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. This will not be the last webinar, I'm sure. I would really love it if Teresa would join us again for another conversation at some point in the future. And
if people found it useful, I don't think I have the monopoly of the answers, but I just hope I shared my experience. That's all I can say. I'm not sure there's rights and wrongs in some of these. Yeah.
There's nuance to everything, isn't there? But
Yeah.
I think this has gone really well, and I think we're getting some lovely comments in the chat there. So thank you very much, Teresa, and this has been great. I'm gonna go ahead and end the event now. My colleague Jack at MindRight will be reaching out, I think, to most of the people who've been on the call, if not all of them, with access to the recording and the transcripts and what have you, should it be useful for you. And thank you very much, everyone, for your time. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.